Hello, everyone. This is Gabriel and broadcasting from Dubai. And in Winnipeg, Canada, is Dr. Gerry Bowler. With him, we'll be speaking today about Santa Claus and the history of Christmas. Hello, Doctor. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, before we begin, let me show our viewers the image of your book, which I've been reading. And it is this one over here. The title is Santa Claus, a biography. And you've written some other books also on the history of Christmas. So if we have time, we can get to that. Now, as I was reading your book, I was thinking if an alien came to visit us during this time of the year, I think that alien would have a hard time figuring out that this holiday is about a boy being born out of a virgin and then later on becoming an adult and dying on a cross. He would think it has more to do with a fat man flying through the skies and going down a chimney to deliver gifts. So I'm curious to know, how did Santa Claus come to displace Jesus, so to speak? I mean, was this a gradual process? Will there come a time when Jesus is completely out of a picture during this time of the year? Give us some insight on that.
That's a good question. Christmas has always had two functions that on the surface might seem contradictory. One is, as you mentioned, the celebration of the Nativity of Jesus. Very religious. It's the second highest festival in the Christian calendar. And the second is a midwinter festival, a celebration of uh, light and greenery and generosity. And the two have been present for the last 1700 years. And there's consistently been tugs between the two poles. But when they work together, they make the whole season very much a success. I don't think that Santa Claus has displaced Jesus. I think Santa Claus has shared the podium with the Christ child, and the two of them, I think, are going to continue to be very successful at making Christmas, as it has become, the number one festivity in the world.
Right. Well, Santa Claus is a Christian figure, of course, because he's based on St. Nicholas, and you can tell us a little bit about St. Nicholas later on. But if reading through your book and this book on Santa Claus and also your book on Christmas, I come to find out that within Christianity, there have been groups that are not happy, not so much with St. Nicholas, because after all, St. Nicholas is a Christian, but with the winter celebration. Because, I mean, why was December 25th chosen? You mentioned in the book that perhaps, I mean, we're not absolutely certain about this, but perhaps it has to do with the winter solstice and the cult of Sol Invictus, right, in the fourth century. And there have been various groups throughout Christianity. For instance, the Puritans is one of them that have opposed the winter aspect of Christmas, because they say, oh, this is paganism. It's not Christianity as such. So how does this, so you're saying that, well, Santa Claus does not displace Jesus. They can both agree to live together and they enrich the holiday season. But some groups have not seen it that way, right? So tell
That's
us.
quite true. Yeah, as soon as Christmas becomes an official holiday in the church in the fourth century, there are movements by church leadership to keep pagan elements from creeping in. They're particularly worried about dancing in the streets, riotous behavior, cross-dressing, dressing up in animal skins. Um, these things preoccupy the church in the early Middle Ages. And lately, with Protestant reformers, the last 4 or 5 centuries, they object to Christmas, not so much because of the midwinter festival, but because of the baby Jesus. They do not want Christmas celebrated for any reason.
Hmm.
Their thinking is that if the command to celebrate is not specifically stated in the Bible, then it's an invention of humanity and therefore idolatry. So the Puritans didn't want Christians flocking to church on Christmas Day. In fact, they arrested those who showed up at Christmas services. You get 21st century neo-Puritans interrupting church services. In the 19th century, as I say in one of my books, Anglican pastors in England had to hand out brass knuckles to the congregation in case Protestant extremists attacked Anglican church Christmas ceremonies. So you're quite right. There's been fierce opposition inside Christianity. It's one of the many wars on Christmas that have taken place over the last 1700 years.
Right. In the book, you mentioned that you're absolutely right. I mean, the opposition is not so much to the fact that it's a winter festival, but that it is a birthday itself. And you mentioned in the book something that really caught my eye. One argument is that who are the ones celebrating birthdays? There's Herod Antipas. And on
Exactly.
that very same day, he killed John the Baptist. So it cannot be
That's
a good
right.
thing, right?
No, birthday is a bad idea.
Right. It's a very ingenious argument if you follow the Bible strictly, as the Puritans certainly did. Right. So tell us a little bit about Santa Claus. How did this figure come about?
Well, Santa is about 200 years old. He is a descendant of, and not to be confused with, St. Nicholas. Gift giving had always been part of Christmas ever since the 4th century. It was adopted from the Roman New Year celebration. And throughout the Middle Ages, gift giving was normal, but partly or mostly about greasing the social intercourse. Gifts were not at all meant for children. If children wanted them, then they had to go around demanding them in the month of December, kind of like kids do now for Halloween. But in the 1100s, all that changes when some, we think nuns in Western Europe begin to mark the feast of St. Nicholas by putting little gifts in the shoes of the kids they look after, and telling the kids that St. Nicholas, who is, after all, the patron saint of children and famous for stories of magical midnight gift bringing, that St. Nicholas has brought them gifts. And this idea explodes in popularity in the Middle Ages. Churches adopt it, families adopt it. And so for hundreds of years, St. Nicholas is the magical Christmas gift bringer, with the emphasis on early December, his feast of December the 6th. Now, St. Nicholas comes under attack in the 16th century when the Protestant Reformation starts. Protestants want the cult of saints abolished, and so poof, there goes St. Nicholas. He disappears in most of the Protestant countries. But the notion of a magical Christmas gift bringer is too valuable to ditch. So parents and churchmen say, it's not St. Nicholas, it's the baby Jesus. It's the Christ child. In France, it's Le Petit Jésus. In Germany, it's Das Christkindl. Similarly, in Eastern Europe, it's the baby Jesus. But the baby Jesus can't do what St. Nicholas did. There are two things that he lacks. One is he lacks a frightening demeanor. St. Nicholas could scare kids into good behavior. He would arrive at children's houses with a bag of toys and a bag of switches with which to thrash bad kids. So the baby Jesus isn't going to scare anybody into good behavior. And secondly, the baby Jesus can't carry the bag of goods. So the baby Jesus requires a scary helper. And all across Europe, he has figures who are usually clad in fur, usually have their face darkened, and they'll be the ones carrying a chain or a whip or a switch, and they do the heavy lifting. that St. Nicholas had done before.
I'm sorry to
Okay.
interrupt you there. Does this
Yeah.
have a racial aspect? Because there, I mean,
No.
over the
No.
last few years, there have been so many
Yeah.
controversy about people painting their faces black. And I know
Sure.
that in some countries, specifically the Netherlands, because I know there's
Yeah.
a big tradition there,
Yeah.
they've done it for centuries. But if you go to the Caribbean islands that are in the
Mhm.
possession of the Dutch crown, for instance,
Yeah.
Aruba and Curacao, there's a lot of black population there, and there it's becoming very politically incorrect to follow this tradition. So I wonder, or because they claim that originally it meant that Santa was a slave master, and the helpers were slaves, just like the
Yeah.
Dutch did in the Caribbean. Is there truth to that? Does this have a racial aspect?
No, and one of the reasons we know that is that Schwarze Piet, Black Pete in the Netherlands, is not the scary guy. St. Nicholas in the Netherlands has no frightening aspect. What the smutted, as we say in English, furry character is really demonic. Some kind of hangover of these Central European monsters that populate the darkest time of the year. And it's the fur that's actually most important for our story. So let's take these guys like Pelznickel or Belsnickel or Ruklaus and put them aside for a second and follow the career of St. Nicholas in the Netherlands. There he's called Sinterklaas. And Sinterklaas is taken to North America by Dutch colonists in the 1600s. And even though those Dutch colonies are conquered by the English and New Amsterdam becomes New York, New York retains the folk memory of this magical Christmas gift bringer named Sinterklaas. And around 1800, the early 1800s, when Christmas on the eastern seaboard of the United States has fallen into disrepute, when it's lost its religious overtones, when it's become kind of a rowdy, outdoor, alcohol-fueled, adult-centered Saturnalia, with violence toward the middle class, violence toward African Americans and immigrants, that some people among the elites begin to think that they need to tame Christmas. They need to bring it indoors, focus it on the kids. And to do so, they revive the folk memory. This is particularly in New York City. They revive the folk memory of Sinterklaas and present him first as the bishop that he was for centuries. And then a little later, in two poems of 1821 and 1822, he is transformed from a bishop into a non-sectarian, fur-clad, polar-centered, Arctic-centered gift bringer in a sleigh powered by reindeer. And the name,
This over here that we have here. Right?
yeah, the name mutates from Sinterklaas to Santa Claus. And these two poems, A Children's Friend in 1821 and The Night Before Christmas in 1822, completely change the holiday. They move the gift bringing from December 6th to Christmas Eve. Instead of a scary bishop, we now have a jolly grandfatherly figure known as Santa Claus. And so what we have is the furs of the scary helpers and the midnight gift bringing of the former bishop, now Santa Claus.
So we can trace it back to these poems in the 1820s.
Poems and things, stories by Washington Irving, paintings start appearing instantly, all kinds of illustrations. America is fascinated by this figure, and they will spend the rest of the 19th century arguing about how he looks. Is he a full-sized figure as he was in The Children's Friend, or is he an elf as he was in The Night Before Christmas? Is he old or young or bearded? Is he looking like a peddler? Does he look like George Washington? Could he be a woman? But over the course of the 19th century, by 1900, Santa becomes standardized into the red and white clad furry guy that you have in your picture there.
Right. This is a silly question, but I want you to answer it. what's the role of Coca-Cola in all of this? Because I know this is a myth, but
Yeah,
please clarify this myth for us.
it is. The Coke Santa ads of the 1930s are painted by an artist named Haddon Sundblom, who made Santa a little fatter, a little more richly clad in furs. But it's the fact that these ads were everywhere. Just a huge percentage of the advertising budget in the United States went on Coca-Cola Santa ads. And so because the red and the white are Coke's colors, the myth grew up that he was an invention of Coca-Cola. But in fact, he wasn't even the first soft drink company to use Santa. That goes to the White Rock Beverage Company, who used Santa as the salesman for their soft drinks during World War I.
Right. Well, I think those people who do not like Santa for whatever reason, whether for religious reasons such as the Puritans and so on, or maybe from the left because they see Santa as an emblem of, rampant capitalism and materialism, it's relatively easy for them to make the connection with Coca-Cola in a sort of conspiracy theory framing, saying that, oh,
Exactly. Yeah.
this very sinister character that our children are celebrating was actually an invention of this very sinister company which sells poison to the world. And I
Sure.
mean, Coca-Cola
And
is pretty much poisonous.
yeah, you throw in the American aspect as well, and you've got in the early 1950s the French Catholic right hating Santa Claus because he displaces the nativity scene, and you've got the French intellectual left that despises American imperialism, and you end up with the Archbishop of Dijon burning Santa Claus in effigy in front of the cathedral, in front of a crowd of cheering children.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
no, go ahead, please finish.
I was going to say that this kind of bipolar dislike of Santa continues to this day. You're going to get attacks from inside Christianity, outside Christianity. Other religions very often get a little antsy about Christmas and Santa. Anti-capitalists. There's no end of excuses to attack Christmas, but there's also groups lining up to appropriate Christmas, to try and let some of the magic of Christmas rub off on them. Vegans, for example, always horn their way into publicity during the Christmas season by talking about the turkey holocaust and bemoaning the millions that are sacrificed on the pyre of Christmas. Yeah, anyway, all kinds of groups like that.
But there is, I mean, I don't know if you agree with me, but there is such a thing as cultural imperialism. And for better or for worse, Santa has become one of the poster boys for that. Do you think it's fair for the anti-imperialists to say Santa is a symbol of what we're against?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a visible symbol and useful to people, useful stick to club Western capitalism over the head with. Yep. As Christmas is to all kinds of terrorist groups. My third book on Christmas, called Christmas in the Crosshairs, which is about the wars on Christmas, talk about feminist groups, topless feminist groups, attacking the nativity scene in the Vatican and trying to kidnap the baby Jesus. Anarchist South American groups setting fire to Christmas trees as a symbol to bring down Western imperialism. It's such a Christmas is the biggest thing. Okay, there's nothing like it in the world. There's no festivity like it, no war like it. Every culture has to deal with it one way or another. Stalin had to deal with it. Hitler had to deal with it. Everybody that wants a piece of the action has to find some way to relate to Christmas either in a positive or a negative fashion.
Right. I like to get back to the original point you disputed about Santa displacing Jesus. I find it very interesting. For instance, here in the Muslim world where I live, you will see Santa everywhere. You will not see Jesus anywhere. And of course, you might say, well, it makes sense because being a Muslim country, uh, Muslims don't believe that Jesus is God. They just believe he's a prophet, so they shouldn't be celebrating. But on the other hand, maybe it might be different in a place like, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Iran, where capitalism has not advanced so much in those countries, although this is beginning to change in Saudi Arabia. But in here in the UAE, you go to any mall and it will be replete with Santa images, but you will not see one single image of baby Jesus or Mary or Joseph or the ox or the mule or the Star of Bethlehem, nothing like that. So does it depend where you are in the world to come forth and give the final call in saying, well, in these areas of the world, Santa does displace Jesus, and these other areas of the world, Santa does not displace Jesus? Because I mean, it seems to me that in the Christian world, yes, they can coexist. But in the non-Christian world, Christmas is also celebrated, but devoid of its religious or of its original religious meaning. And once you remove the original religious meaning, you're left with Santa all alone. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever thought about that particular phenomenon, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, two things. In the Arab world, it's not that Santa has displaced Jesus. Jesus was displaced in the 7th century. He hasn't been a figure in Saudi Arabia for quite a while. But secondly, Santa Claus, in the eyes of many Muslims, is a Christian religious symbol. Turkish ultra-Muslim groups, when they stage demonstrations, are stabbing images of Santa Claus, not of the baby Jesus. So he retains, in the eyes of those who despise Christianity, I guess, some memory hangover of his connection to St. Nicholas and the original meaning of Christmas. But it's true, there is an anxiety among a lot of Christians about how he displaces Jesus. Franco, for example, the dictator of Spain, campaigned against Santa Claus and against Christmas trees as being Northern Protestant inventions. We have South American bishops calling Santa Claus a drunken lout. Yeah. One of my favorite signs of this is a Protestant Christmas ornament, which you'll see quite widely on the internet. And that is of Santa Claus taking his hat off. He's always bald underneath, and kneeling at the side of the manger, apologizing to the baby Jesus for displacing him, and acknowledging him that that Jesus is superior as a figure to Santa Claus.
Right, but it also goes the other way, as far as I can see, because reading your book on the war on Christmas, it comes to my mind that those groups, ultra secularists, we might call them that, who do not like the phrase Merry Christmas, and they're the ones who say Happy Holidays, and they're the ones who tell the store managers, don't say Happy Christmas to your to your clients. So you can tell me a little bit about that later on. But it seems to me that those people, they don't have so much of a quarrel with Santa, but rather with the more overt religious symbols such as Jesus. So,
Right.
so in the Christmas war, in the war on Christmas, those who want to go back to the Christian roots, they hate Santa.
Mm-hmm.
But those who want a secular state, a truly secular state, they don't care about Santa. Santa is a welcome figure. The one they really hate is the Virgin, Jesus, and so on.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that's the topic of the Christmas wars, largely in the English-speaking world. There's billboard campaigns for and against Christmas in North America and in Britain. And you're quite right. They focus on the manger rather than on Santa Claus. This is the time for atheists to come forth and get a piece of the action. It's just too good an opportunity for them to miss. And so they'll petition state governments to put up either a secular display in the legislature building or a demonic display. The Church of Satan wants their demon to be portrayed alongside the nativity scene as well. Yeah, as I say, every group has to come to terms one way or another with Christmas.
Let me talk a little bit more about this war on Christmas. So what's your particular view regarding this? Have the secularists gone too far in their requests?
Well, as I say, there's always been a war on Christmas, and there's usually 2 or 3 different wars on Christmas going on at a time. In the English-speaking world, it's really a question not so much of Christmas as to what share of the public space will be allowed to religion. And secularists have chosen the Christmas season as being the most visible Christian presence in the marketplace of ideas to be the arena for this debate. They certainly have gone too far. There's just some preposterous statements made. There was a professor at the University of Ottawa that said that Canadian National Art Gallery putting up a Christmas tree was a direct message to immigrants saying, "You're not welcome here." Well, that's just plain silly. You've got school boards saying that you can't play Christmas, the school band can't play Christmas music, even if there's no lyrics. That somehow White Christmas violates the separation of church and state. You've got all kinds of court cases. You've got wonderful debates every year that I love to follow as to what the governor of a particular state is going to call the state Christmas tree this year. Is it going to be allowed to be the Christmas tree, or is it going to be the holiday tree or the giving tree or the community tree? Yeah, I keep score.
Right.
So,
but
yeah,
I wonder how secularists face their inconsistency of being against Jesus, but not being so much against Santa, as if Santa were not a religious icon himself.
Yes, and the same is true of Hanukkah. Very few people, aside from Christopher Hitchens, will actually attack Hanukkah. And very few people will object to the presence of a Jewish menorah in the public displays that are in airports or city halls. Nobody calls the menorah the holiday candelabra, the way they want to call the Christmas tree the holiday tree. So there is inconsistency. Christianity is really the enemy. Other religions, other aspects of Christmas pale into insignificance.
Right. Well, the people who are critical, who criticize those who claim that there is a war on Christmas, say that they are paranoid. And in your book, you say that the one figure in the U.S. that brought one of the main figures that brought forth this idea of the war on Christmas was Bill O'Reilly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a conservative pundit who, I mean, in political terms, he is very far to the right, and he does have a conspiracy theory style in things apart from Christmas. I mean, he does think that, you know, the Chinese are spying on the US and stuff like that. And sometimes he makes claims that are overblown, right? So he does have somewhat of a conspiracy mindset. Now, on the basis of that, leftist critics always say, oh, there he goes again. He's being paranoid once again, bringing this Christmas issue when in fact there is no war on Christmas.
Yeah.
But you do say in the book that O'Reilly does have a point to a certain extent. So he's not just an old paranoid guy. I mean, many of the things that he says, he's right to call them out, right?
He is. Having said that, there are nutsy cuckoo opponents of the left out there who will say that, you know, because this year Starbucks doesn't have the baby Jesus on it, that Christmas, there's a war on Christmas. That's not being serious. It's a war, a genuine war on religion, with Christmas as the excuse. Now, as to Bill Riley and the war against Christmas, he gets it wrong as well. He thinks that his campaign to force Walmart and department stores to say Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays is winning the war against Christmas. But in fact, what he should be concentrating on is the commercialism of Christmas, that the focus not on Santa, but what's under the tree, the obsession with more and spending. If you want a war against Christmas, Bill, then maybe that's the one that you really should be focusing on.
Indeed. I mean, leftist critics have always said that capitalism has a great ability to subvert that which that which opposes to them, right? So for
Sure.
instance, think of, for instance, Che Guevara. I mean, an icon of revolution against capitalism. And after he dies, what do big companies do? They just sell shirts.
Sure, they make
And
T-shirt
yeah, and by selling
makers.
those T-shirts, that might actually be one way of putting away his ideology, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, I want to expand this point a little bit, if you could. How does commercialism, under the guise of Christmas, may actually be a tool to subvert the original Christmas spirit?
Um, I if it does, it's entirely by accident. Merchants seized on Santa Claus almost as soon as he was invented. Here is an avatar of generosity, non-sectarian, and not subject to copyright. So Santa is the first imaginary figure whose advice we take about buying things, and all. He is the ancestor of Ronald McDonald, and any imaginary, Uncle Ben's rice, Aunt Jemima's syrup, and so on. But they don't want to kill the golden goose, or the goose that lays the golden egg. Capitalism, as Marx said, all that is solid melts into air. It has this ability to transform and corrode and undermine. And this is what Christians who love Christmas have to contend with. And one of the things that is happening in churches and among parents is shifting away from Santa Claus to St. Nicholas. Here is a magical midnight Christmas gift bringer who is not seized upon by advertisers of whiskey or condoms or power tools. So you'll see a lot of parents and churches sneaking St. Nicholas back into the program.
Right. As I was reading both of your books, I haven't read them cover to cover, so I might be wrong on this, but I didn't see any discussion of the racial aspect of Santa Claus. Now, granted, you wrote this 15 years ago, so this was not a hot issue. But 2020, with the death of George Floyd, everyone is talking about race. And with so many statues coming down, the moniker is always, dead white male, right? And even Thomas Jefferson, yeah, he owned slaves, but he did a lot of good things. He's coming down, right? And it seems to be much more because of the identity than because of the deeds in this age of identity politics.
Sure.
And I mean, if you think of an emblematic dead white guy, it's Santa himself. So I wonder if you're aware of any racial movements that want to change Santa's appearance, make him either female or darker in skin. And this is it's interesting because one of the identities that in this age of identity politics is trying to be brought to the forth again is fatness, right? And
Hmm.
there's people who say, well, we shouldn't,
Yes,
we
body
shouldn't.
positivity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, at least Santa would be on their side. That's the only aspect. But so
yeah,
in terms of obesity, he's safe. But in terms of skin color
yeah.
and gender, he's on thin ice. So do you foresee that in the future these movements may actually target Santa and eventually will wind up with black Santas and female
Oh,
Santas and so
sure.
on?
No, actually both those books, both the Santa Claus biography and the more recent War on Christmas, I do deal with this. Um, it has come so far from feminists for whom white and male are synonymous as engines of evil. So usually fat white male is the phrase you get uh, from feminists. There is the racial aspect in the Netherlands. As you say, now we're seeing Black Pete appearing as polka dot Pete, rainbow Pete, and in the town of Gouda, which is famous for its cheese-colored uh, Pete. There are efforts in a lot of department stores in the United States to have the option of Black Santas for African American kids to come and visit. We're certainly becoming more attuned to that, but you're never going to change that very much. If you look at some Chinese and Japanese portrayals of Santa Claus in advertisements, he ends up looking fairly Asian sometimes. Um, but I wouldn't see any significant change to Santa Claus for a long time to come. The myth has endured almost unchanged since the 1820s. The only addition that commercialism has been able to impose on the Santa myth is the addition of a ninth reindeer of Rudolph, which was the idea of the department store in Chicago in 1939. But otherwise, he's the same color. He um, is untainted by his association with all kinds of commercial products, of movies that try and kill him off or replace him or give him evil children. Um, Bounces off him. I think he's pretty impermeable.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned Christopher Hitchens a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
You made me think of his good old friend Richard Dawkins. And
Oh yeah.
Dawkins, uh, he was another of the guys who was very much against Santa uh, on account of the fact that if you make children believe that a fat man from the North Pole will come and deliver gifts, somehow you're impairing their critical
Yes.
thinking
Oh yeah.
abilities.
Yeah.
And there's always been a debate among psychologists as to whether or not parents do harm to
Mm-hmm.
kids by perpetuating the Santa myth. What's your view on this?
Well, one of the most famous opponents of the Santa Claus myth was a Canadian. He was known as the man who killed Santa Claus. He was the first head of the World Health Organization, the Canadian Deputy Minister of Health, and a psychiatrist. And he felt that teaching any kind of fantasy story impaired reason and made kids susceptible to fascism and other kinds of totalitarianism. I, on the other hand, think that Santa Claus is a wonderful gift in himself. I think that he teaches kids generosity, um, forcing them to wait, to defer gratification. Parents are able to say, I know you want that new Xbox, but maybe you'll get it for Christmas. It's also, it gives kids a different sense of time, that the time flows differently depending on the season. And it's a remarkable display of altruism for parents to deflect um, gratitude that is due to them to this fantasy figure. It's a wonderful thing to see kids in anticipation of something magic. And overwhelmingly, when kids learn the truth, they're not upset. They are, first of all, they've usually figured it out a year or two before the parents are willing to give up the story. And so what the kids are really asking for is confirmation, is what I think correct. And when the parent says, yes, you're right, they're pleased with their own powers of reasoning. And they're also delighted to be let into the adult conspiracy, to become the sibling that now knows that he's one with mom and dad. And you mustn't tell, little brother or sister about this. So I would say overwhelmingly, teaching kids about Santa Claus is a good idea. And I preach this to the church groups that I talk to all the time.
There are some counter arguments that I would like to voice and hear your reply if possible. Sure. I mean, the one that I always hear, and I think it was from people like Richard Dawkins himself, apart from the thing of the impairment of critical thinking skills, and this Canadian person that you're talking about, that any fantasy story might actually impair critical thinking skills, there's also the concern that if you tell a kid, okay, if you behave well, then you have the Xbox, as you mentioned. I mean, that goes against the more philosophical idea that you should do good for good's sake, and that you don't need a security camera to be watching you over, right? And because, I mean, the day that there is no Xbox, does that mean that you have a free license to misbehave? I mean, let's say that your parents go through a bad situation and during a recession or during 2020 because of COVID. I mean, I suppose that this Christmas there will be a lot of kids who will not get the Xbox that they're used to get. In their mind, would that mean, well, wait a minute, I behaved well, I didn't get the Xbox, then the hell with this. Next year, I'm gonna misbehave and do as I wish, because there is just no justice in this. So instead of teaching kids to do good for the sake of good itself, you're teaching kids to do good because someone else is watching you. So what's your reply to that? Because that's an argument that I hear very often.
Yeah, one of the main reasons that humans have been religious is that the gods have always been the guarantors of morality. And this goes back to primitive religions, the Greeks, the Romans, Christianity, Islam. Humans need every inducement to decent behavior that they can get. And if it's God or Zeus or the elf on the shelf, I'm in favor of it. Secondly, it's only a real materialist, someone who argues that there is nothing beyond our senses, that objects to fantasy figures like the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny, or Santa Claus. And the same people that are against Santa Claus are against fairy tales. In my third book, I talk about the Russian desire in the 1920s to do away with fantasy figures. And I think it was the Young Communist League, the Komsomol, was staging an anti-fantasy show. And they were taking, I forget, I think maybe Cinderella and some good fairy off to be shot. And the kids were screaming, no, don't shoot the good fairy. So I'm a believer in the supernatural. Any religious person is. And I don't find Santa Claus an engine of antinomianism, as you suggest, that if there is no Santa Claus, there is no God, there are no laws. An interesting theory. I've yet to see it in action.
Right. But I mean, the myth at some point in a child's life has to come to an end, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I struggle personally with this. What's the right age for a parent to come to terms with this and let's say, okay, enough is enough?
When the kid is ready. And interestingly, we haven't many surveys on average age, but the one that is mentioned in my Santa Claus book, kids now believe longer, at least in the 20th century, kids took longer to come to the truth in the 20th century than they did in the 19th century. 19th century kids seem to have been more skeptical and suspicious. Yeah, at some point, I have grandchildren, and they're all around 6 or 7, and this will be the age in which they're catching on. I caught out Santa Claus when I left. You leave stuff out for Santa. We left out cookies and a Japanese orange, which was traditional in Canada, a mandarin orange, and I marked it, put a little cross on it. And sure enough, that same orange that I left out for Santa was put in my stocking. So I knew that something fishy was going on. Yeah. So when the child is ready, he or she will let you know.
Right. Well, Dr. Gary Bowler, just one final question that's coming to my mind, and then we can go. In recent years, one of the attempts to re-Christianize Christmas by not getting rid of Santa is by going back to the image of St. Nicholas the Bishop, right?
Mhm.
But not just as the gift giver, but also as the theologian and the one who is very committed to Christian truth. And
Mhm.
I've seen in many memes, I want to ask you if this is true or not. This idea that we do know apparently that he went to the Council of Nicaea,
Mhm.
and that when Arius, who was the one who was being questioned for his heretical views there, saying that the son is not as big
Not
as
equal to the
yeah,
father.
not equal to the father because he was created in time. Saint Nicholas, who was on the Orthodox side, he was so upset by what he was hearing that he went across and he slapped Arius. And a lot of people who want to re-Christianize Christmas, they say that's the Saint Nicholas that you
That's
should
what we want.
follow.
Let's
That's
smack an
what we
area.
want.
Yeah,
Yeah,
smack
we
a
don't
heretic for Christmas.
exactly. We don't want the fat guy coming down the chimney. We want someone who's zealous about Christian truth and defends it against heresy or impiety or atheism. So is this particular incident true? Did it happen?
Um, he is said in one account to attend the Council of Nicaea. We don't have the records of the council itself are incomplete, and his name isn't on a list. Certainly, the Middle Ages believed in the legend, and it's somewhat backed up by a reconstruction of the skull of Saint Nicholas that the Italians have in Bari, in the cathedral there. And he looks to have had his nose broken and reset at some point, as if he were a pugnacious kind of guy. So yeah, I'm quite willing to believe in Nicholas, the heretic smiter.
All right. All right. Well, Dr. Gary Bowler, it's been my pleasure, and I have truly enjoyed both books. I hope to finish reading them by December 25th, because I've jumped from one book to the other, going
Right.
back and forth because they have very interesting data, and I have learned quite a lot. So my pleasure and all the best.
Thank you, Gabriel. Merry Christmas, if I may
Merry
dare say
Christmas to
so.
you. Yes, of course. I'm not a warrior against Christmas.
All right, good.
I'm in a Muslim country, and I surely appreciate when people tell me Merry Christmas. And you'll be surprised that Muslims are far more willing in the Muslim world to say Merry Christmas than many secularists
Yeah,
in the
I
US
would
and
agree.
Canada. So,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
indeed. All right. All the
Happy
best.
trails.
Yes.
Bye-bye.